Welcome back, friends. The last time we met, we wondered how Trump would slip out of the corner he had painted himself in. I am referring to the so called peace talks with Tehran. Now we know what he attempted. What he did was that this time round, he demanded from Iran conditions which he, President Trump, knew very well Tehran would not agree to. And those demands were Tehran should limit nuclear enrichment to the absolute minimum, to zero. And secondly, Tehran should give up its ballistic missiles. Obviously, Tehran would not agree to it, and they had indicated even before the talks began that these conditions are unacceptable. So it's fairly obvious that what President Trump was looking for was to make demands that Tehran would reject and then use that as an excuse to go back to war. The third demand he made was that Iran should not back, should not support Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Hamas in Palestine, both of which Tehran also rejected. Now, he has a problem because having Tehran rejected his demands, now he has to go to war, which is what he originally planned. He and Israel together had planned to do that. But unlike the attack last year, 2025, when both US and Israel attacked Iran, which we discussed earlier, this time around, Iran is not alone. Iran has received state-of-the-art radar systems and also supplies of missiles from Russia. What this means is that unlike last time, this time Tehran is able to retaliate, and they have said so. And many military analysts in the United States itself have argued that Tehran now possesses sufficient missile power to sink even an aircraft carrier. Now, will Trump take this risk and launch a war and suffer what obviously is a major defeat? But but to discuss about the military conflict and the military aspects of it is really important, of course, but it tends to detract from what's actually going on. This time round, when Tehran went into negotiations, he was advised, so we hear by Beijing and by Moscow, to offer President Trump a face-saving way out. Sort of agree not zero enrichment, but to agree on a compromise of 5 or 10% enrichment of uranium for peaceful purposes. Behind this lies the approach both Beijing and Moscow have taken in dealing with President Trump, that is to say, this deep state that works behind him. Both Beijing and Moscow realize, and they are compensating for it, they realize that the ruling class in the United States is in a state of panic. It watches the American power declining. They watch the economy getting into deeper and deeper trouble, despite all of Trump's talk about the stock market doing well. Perhaps that's right, the stock market is on the rise, but the average person is finding it more and more difficult to put food on the table. So the condition in the United States that worries the ruling class is that, first of all, weapons are freely available, and almost every adult male either has or can acquire weapons, guns, ammunition almost over the counter. Now, this poses a major difficulty for the ruling class, and their reaction to it is, on the one hand, as Trump is doing, using immigrants as an excuse to militarize the society. And watching this, both Beijing and Moscow are aware that the ruling class in the United States should not be pushed to the brink. They must be given some way out. To put it differently, they realize the US economy and the power of the ruling class is on the wane, but it is necessary to bring them down slowly. If there's a sudden drop, then they could trigger a nuclear war, or at least a major conventional war. So the approach of China and Russia has been to not confront Washington directly, not make Washington feel that suddenly everything is collapsing, but to allow Washington some leeway where it's able to adjust to the decline over time. And this, I think, both Beijing and Moscow, and now more so in the case of Tehran, they fully understand that Washington must be helped to go down gently without major shocks. And that has been the approach you would have noticed in Ukraine. When, when Russia started the special military operation in February 2022, Putin had launched an operation that went slowly in stages. And even now, after almost 3.5 years, or shall we say 4 years, the operation is still ongoing, and it has led many European commentators to claim that Russia is a paper bear, that Russian army is moving at a snail's pace across Ukraine. That is precisely the impression Putin wanted to create, that Russia is not a major threat, which therefore denies the ruling class in the United States of whipping up hysteria for a war against Russia. China has done the same thing. They have not confronted fully America's tariff war. They have reacted to it. They have threatened to cut off rare earth metals, and they did at one point reduce it. But then again, they agreed to release some rare earth metals. The idea was that not to give Washington and President Trump and his coterie a reason to whip up hysteria that the United States is facing an existential threat. Now, this is a background in which we have to watch and understand the negotiations between Tehran and Washington. Tehran is following that playbook, agreeing to a little bit, but pulling back, but at the same time saying that let's talk again. So Tehran is also now walking down the same path of not confronting the United States frontally, but actually maneuvering it to a position that its power continues to wane in West Asia. And by West Asia, of course, I mean Middle East, which is what the former colonialists and the current neo-colonialists call West Asia. So in West Asia, as American power declines, there is increasing worry in Washington. As you know, Saudi Arabia is now trading oil, or rather selling oil to China and they're receiving payment in yuan. And this is a major break of the dollar system that the United States imposed in 1972. So what we have now is that Trump, having demanded negotiations, he has been unable to achieve any result. At the same time, he is cautious about going back to war because of the military assistance China and Russia has given to Iran. So he's in a sense caught in a trap of his own making. He he flamboyantly uh, sailed the aircraft carriers into the Indian Ocean, said that he is going to collapse the Iranian state, and of course the ultimate objective was to change the government, to overthrow Ayatollah and install the former Shah's son, Reza Shah II, who Americans have been keeping on ice in the United States. Now he is sitting on the ringside, as it were, waiting to be called in to from uh, take over Iran after the Ayatollahs have been deposed. Now, whether Trump can do that militarily is becoming more and more dubious. Still, it's possible. People can be rational. Still, it's possible that Washington would try some military venture. What would happen then remains to be seen. But clearly, it is a situation where no such military intervention is guaranteed of victory. With the alliance between Tehran, Beijing, and Moscow solidifying day by day, it's clear that the military solution is now being gradually exhausted. And this led to reach the last point. This is the only condition where there can be peace in the Middle East. That is to say, a Muslim country in the Middle East, what the colonialists call the Middle East, and what we call West Asia, that a Muslim country in West Asia should have the military capacity to take on Israel. And that is now happening in the case of Iran. And that is one more reason why the United States is very keen to pull the teeth, as it were, of the Iranian military. Let us meet again, see how far this goes from the United States standpoint and how Tehran handles the emerging contradictions. Thank you for being here. Goodbye.